is that when I started to become Christian, I started to get really into like minimalism and living below my means. Like I don't need a bunch of stuff to be happy, and consumerism is really
Yeah.
destructive to me. I bought a lot of random stuff. Like I bought like a lot of manga, and I'm like, why did I just buy like 50 of
Whoa,
these?
cringe.
Yeah, it's very cringy, and it's also like your money is your time. So why am I wasting it
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
buying a consumer good when you could buy something like land or something that's going to actually help you be free? And that's one thing I
Exactly.
appreciated about a lot of your videos is talking. I mean, that's how I actually first found it. It was like, how to not be a wagey anymore, and like, go live in the country. And you talk about like the ThinkPad and the ThinkPad of cards, the Lexus, and credit card churning, like all of these ways where the money that you do have is going to go further, and living below your means because you really don't need that much to be really happy.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
you have God, if you have your community, like focus your time on living below your means and investing in things that are actually going to make you free. So my question
Yeah.
is, did you always have that mindset of kind of like living below your means, or did that kind of start when you to start to, well, I guess you lost everything, so
Yeah.
you
Well, I think even before that, I
yeah.
kind of had the mindset of I think it started as a personal disposition when I was
Mhm.
younger. I think I wrote in a blog post like millennials are more or less divided in two categories. You have like the constant like spenders who are just blowing money everywhere. They're getting coffees all the time, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
And then you have maybe a smaller segment of them who's like, let's see, can I live in a 10 by 20 box for the rest of my life? And that's kind of how I was, from the beginning. Like, there's a point where when I was 18, I'm like, okay, I have a car. Could I live in this car if I need to?
Yeah.
Like how? And so that
Mhm.
kind of is my mindset,
Mhm.
and it can be good or bad. Like, there's a sense in which it can be like a vice,
Mhm.
because it becomes like almost in a way. I feel sometimes. Let's say you mentioned like credit card churning and stuff like that,
Yeah.
which I'm a proponent of whatever you can to not invest in the world more. But you don't. I realize that at some point there's sometimes like a lot of people are greedy for money. It's almost like I'm greedy for exploiting things or like I
Yeah.
feel like there's something vicious about it, like it's a vice. So you have to, but I do think the goal in general is, as I said, like living in a close community of people physically next to each other,
Yeah.
where the normal ins and outs of life you just don't need. Like, you don't need to drive 20 minutes to the store to get something for $20
Mhm.
to do something basic anymore.
Yeah.
And you look at, I mean, a great example. There are many good examples of people who live in a traditional lifestyle. In the Orthodox world, so in America we have the Amish, right? In the
Yeah.
Orthodox world, it's kind of the old believers. A
Mhm.
lot of them live more or less like Amish people.
Yeah.
They wear older clothing and they live in communities. But one thing I think, just reading about a community like that, let's say the Amish, like if
Mhm.
an Amish person wants a house, what happens? They all get together over a weekend. They build a house.
Mhm.
After the weekend, done. The house is built. Okay.
Yeah.
There's no debt. There's no like, unnecessary spending. All the labor is just done. And everyone knows how to do it because they've done it a million times. You get a free house and you participate in building everyone else's houses. And
Yeah.
that's not just an Amish quirk. I was actually reading a historical document from the county I live in from the 1800s, and they're actually talking about these house rates. I mean, everyone used to do this.
Yeah.
Everyone used to do that. This is not just some Amish weird thing.
Mhm.
This is just human life, and we've lost it. We've totally lost it, or even more than that. I think it's really important. Like, any property you buy should really ideally be in your family for as long as it can be. Like,
Yeah.
um, if you have property, if you have 5 acres or something like that, expect to build all your kids' houses there. You know what I mean? That's,
Mhm.
I think, the mindset we have to have,
Yeah.
and it's very different, but it's so much better, and it's so much like a lot of the pain in the modern world is self-imposed.
Yeah.
It is, we choose to live this painful and also sinful life. And ultimately sin isn't fun. Like, sin isn't joyful.
Mhm.
There might be some fleeting enjoyment, but like, You know, I think that if anything, in most cases, people need to be more true to what they kind of know is the right thing to do,
Yeah.
or the thing that's going to, I don't know, like there's a lot of it's like what I said earlier. Growing up as a young Protestant, there were a lot of things, you know, I grew up with where I'm kind of like, this is kind of weird that we do this.
Hmm.
Isn't this, I don't know, isn't this like weird VBS stuff where we're dancing and like goofing around? There's all these light colors. Is this really the appropriate way to worship God? You know, you kind of have this like reaction. It's very natural, you know,
Hmm.
and it doesn't just apply to faith. It applies to everything in life. Like
Yeah.
if the fact that, I mean, let's say schooling, I'm a big proponent of what's called unschooling, which is really just like, don't send your kids to school. You know, let them learn in the natural way. If they have intellectual aspirations, they will naturally run across those. If they don't, they don't need a massive formal education, you know?
Hmm.
And that's one thing where schooling is a great example, where it's so unnatural. You take these kids, you put them in a classroom for 8 hours a day. They
Hmm.
don't have, and guess what? They don't behave because it's evil what you're doing in
Yeah.
essence. And oh well, we'll just give them Ritalin, we'll give them drugs if they not, you know,
Yeah.
it's so every like, it's not just the stimulus is bad, but the response to the stimulus is bad,
Hmm.
and like it just gets worse and worse. And so
Yeah.
that's why it's important, as I said, if you're going to be in the world, you know, and I struggle with this as well, but if you're going to be in the world, just dip your toes a little bit if you need something,
Hmm.
but the rest of you should be able to leave at any point, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, what's really sad is when someone is 10 years into a career and they just don't feel like they can get out of it.
Hmm.
That's sad. I mean, that is slavery. It really is slavery, and it's also being a slave to the world, you know, the in a bad sense, the world, you know.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah, I think there's a huge problem with schooling. It doesn't actually teach people skills. Like they learn all these facts that aren't actually like applicable to their life. And I think there's a lot of truth in what you said about, people who have aptitude are naturally gonna search out these things. Like I know lots of people who are homeschooled and they're, very high achievers because you don't need to sit in a classroom for 8 hours a day, and especially with what they're teaching nowadays, it's just completely
Yeah.
unproductive, and it's actually destructive to children, and it's all meant to
Right.
just socialize them, not actually make them free,
Absolutely.
independent people. And I think that's the whole problem with the system is they want to disconnect people from the basic tasks that humans used to do, like food collection, building a house. Like the average person in high school isn't going to be able to think, oh, I can build a house because there's all these regulations and you have to do, you have to use all these like tools and stuff like that. But it really, if you're building something simpler like the Amish or some of these like traditional communities, it doesn't need to be that complicated. We've just overcomplicated it so much, and houses are so big now. They're like, they make, the square footage, it just keeps increasing. Of course, if you're making like a
Yeah.
huge house, it's gonna take a lot of skilled labor. But I think really getting back to, I think really the core of it is individualism, or like toxic individualism versus some form of collectivism. Is that, especially Orthodox Christians in America, is we should see ourselves as a collective on the local level, because those are the people that are going to be impacting your life the
Yeah.
most, and getting
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
connected with them, keeping wealth within your communities, keeping your toes, as little in the world as possible, because we don't want to be like the world. Don't want to. I mean, because the world inflames our passions and distracts us, really.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That's and I think the thing, again, like the hard thing for me or anyone else, is we have to be willing to kind of make sacrifices to get to that point.
Yeah.
And once we're there, it becomes a lot easier. It becomes easier as you go on. You know, it's not like I remember one of my old videos that, I don't know if it was one of my more popular ones, but I think it was one of the more impactful ones in terms of like the responses I got, or emails, where I'm like, um, will you ever stand up for yourself, or something
Yeah.
like that,
Yeah.
where it was talking it wasn't really about the can you say that on the thing a couple years ago, it's that band, I don't know. Can we
Stabbing.
talk about the shots? By the way, I assume all that. So it's all being memory hold. So I can talk about the vaccines, whatever.
Mhm.
So the COVID vaccines or whatever, which I didn't really talk about those. But what annoyed me why I did that video is like these guys who are like, I don't want to get the vaccine, but I'm going to give in because I just have to. And I think my point in that video is like, if you're going to give in now, that's just giving them license next time
Yeah.
to for the next thing. You're going to have to give into that. You're going to have another struggle. Whereas if you make the stand now, it's actually going to be easier, you know?
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I look at it. Like, I'm glad that I actually moved when I did. You know, I'm glad that I like lost everything when I was 25 instead of when I was 30. That would have been a lot harder. And actually,
Yeah.
property's a lot more expensive, you know?
Uh-huh.
So
Yeah.
it would have been a mess. But
Yeah. And so, yeah, all these things in the world, like I remember seeing your videos about modern, TV and movies, and
oh
how
yeah,
it really feeds into this cycle, and there's propaganda on every level, from the education system, and ads, TV, movies, and I think that's why we're seeing such a growth in like alternative um, entertainment, alternative education, but
yeah.
yeah, how
Well,
would
I
you?
don't even believe in the alternatives. So,
Yeah, yeah,
so what's an issue to me is
hmm
when people, they don't like, oh, well, I don't like this TV show or I don't like the news, so
yeah,
I'm going to make my own news. And in reality, like all of that kind of stuff is really a spiritual distraction. I think even, um, I think even being too invested in things like politics or something like that
yeah,
can really just, I don't know, cover your spiritual eye, and you
yes,
you read things in the wrong way, and you invest yourself in the wrong things that ultimately you don't have control over, like that's kind of the I guess the thing about democracy that's really pernicious, that's really kind of evil, is that it's based on a lie that we can control power in the world, that we can control the principalities and power.
hmm
If anything, it's so wicked because it gets people invested in it because they feel like they can affect things, and that is a spiritual distraction. And that is you get invested in these things that you can't control, and you start rooting for a team. Even if that's not to say everyone's in politics is equal, I'm not saying that or anything,
yeah,
but I'm just saying it's not for us. It's not for us to be invested in it.
hmm
It's a distraction. Same thing with most of this stuff. Like there is no alternative for, people would often ask me like, hey Luke, you're into free software. What's a good free software alternative for like Twitter or Reddit or something like that? And it's like, I mean, there are some, but you shouldn't be using them. Like,
yeah,
they- just stop. You just close the screen here. Oh, I don't want to do that. It's probably gonna mess something up. But you know,
yeah.
um,
Yeah, because all these things are ultimately meant to sedate us. I really think they're bred in circuses. Is these shouldn't be the thing that define our life. Is the TV shows and your job and things like that. It should be the people around you, focusing on them, your local church, and because the people who like hyper obsess about like politics and like things in the world, I mean, on the left and right, I noticed that they're just very doomer and black pilled, and they're like sad about something that was never even in their control in the first place, because
yeah,
they have that illusion that if we just win this election, everything's gonna change. And it's not that, there can be good changes from elections, but it's just your ultimate hope should not be in that. It's like you should be focusing on your own repentance, because that's ultimately
right.
what's going to matter at the final judgment. It's not going to matter, how much you cared about this certain political issue. It's going to be really, were you Christ-like?
Yeah,
Were you humble? And
yeah.
yeah,
And that especially the kind of political. I don't want to talk too much, even
yeah,
indirectly, about politics, but
uh-huh.
like, I think the complexity of the world is so great
hmm
that individual humans truly, it's so difficult to actually understand how things are going to be affected by this policy change or the other. There are some things that are very black and white. Okay, abortion's demonic.
yeah,
Okay, things like that.
yeah,
But even then, when you have the layer of democracy on top, you actually don't know. Okay, well maybe Trump is more likely to do something about abortion, even though he says he's not going to. But you also might get worse stuff in Israel because of him. You know, there's all this kind of stuff going on, and ultimately, I'm just not qualified. I'm not a spirit bearing elder that can see the future, and I know exactly how to interact all this kind of stuff. So I think it's very unwise to be emotionally attached to it. Most of all, I'm not going to fault someone who like votes in an election, you know, whatever. I think there's something weird about. I will say, like, I become like kind of wary about participation in that in general. But like, I'm not going to fault someone definitely for you know, voting or something like that. But most important, no matter what you do, is you have you don't have spiritual distractions when you're living your spiritual life, and you're focused on, you know, you can't beat all the evil in the world. You're not under obligation to do that. You have to beat the evil within yourself. And you know, that's really the struggle. That's a struggle. It's very difficult even to do it for yourself. But like, don't bite off more than you can chew, that you have no hope of chewing, you know?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's what living in this modern age and like being hyper connected to everything, it makes you feel like you do have, like you can make a change on these like global things, but it's ultimately just leading you to despair versus just focusing on that is defeat the evil within yourself. Is that's the whole approach of orthodoxy is like if you want to save other people, focus on your own repentance. And that's really
Yeah.
difficult is
Yeah.
confronting your own sins every single day.